All right, class. Today what we're going to be talking about is we're going to be talking about pop and folk culture. We're going to be talking about pop and folk culture. So where we're going to start is we're going to start with the idea of culture itself. So we're going to be talking about what is culture. All right, so we're going to do a think, pair, share with the term, just defining the term culture. So what I want you guys to do is just take a few seconds just to define the term culture in your head, and then we'll pair up and we'll talk about that. So just take a few seconds just to think about what you think the word culture is. Now that you have this idea of culture in your head, what I want you to do is I want you to pair up 2 or 3 people with people around you, and I want you to discuss what your ideas are and see if you guys agree, disagree, see if you guys can come up with a working definition of culture. Alright guys, so let's start off with Emily. Emily, would you start off and tell us, how did you define culture?
Culture is like a group's various beliefs and ideas, but it's shown through art and literature and music and clothing.
Okay, so it's kind of what makes a group a group, right? It's what it gives them that characteristic. It makes them unique. It makes them themselves. All right? But today we're not just going to be using the word culture. We're going to be building on that, right? Here's our definition of culture. We've got the body of customary beliefs, social forms, and material traits that together constitute a group's distinct tradition. You guys nailed that. I mean, you guys understand what culture is, so we don't have to spend a ton of time discussing what is culture. So let's build on that. Let's talk a little bit about 2 different types of culture. We've got pop culture, and we've got folk culture. And when we're looking at pop culture, what we're really looking at is we're looking at culture that we find in a large, heterogeneous society, diverse society, things that cover massive people in massive areas for people who aren't necessarily all that alike. Whereas when we think folk culture, we're thinking about small, homogeneous societies that tend to be a little more isolated. So this folk culture is very distinctly them. Whereas pop culture is kind of everybody, folk culture is kind of them, a small group. So let's see if we can pick it out. All right, we've got pop or folk culture. I'm going to give you guys some examples, and you guys are going to tell me, is it pop or is it folk culture? So let's look at this first one, Rachel. Let's look at this first one in the Ukraine. We've got a billboard in the Ukraine. Rachel, pop, folk culture. What do you think?
Pop.
You're absolutely right. How do you know?
A lot of people don't have a laptop.
Okay, so it's a laptop.
Yeah.
Build on that. Why is that not just kind of a folk localized thing?
I don't know. They're not into really small groups.
Okay, you're not going to find, when we think of laptops, we don't necessarily think of a small isolated group somewhere. Daniel, you want to add to that?
It's a technology that everyone shares.
Absolutely, everybody shares it. The second you say everybody, then all of a sudden we're talking about pop culture. Here we go. Egypt. Anna. Pop or folk culture here?
Folk culture?
You're nailing it. Why? You're absolutely right.
Because it's a building that's specific to wherever it's Egypt.
Absolutely. This is Egyptian architecture. This is Egyptian culture. When you see this, it screams Egypt. You're not going to find this in Paris. You're not going to find this in Luxembourg, right? You're not going to find this all over the world. This is something that is very specific to a small group. And that's why we're talking folk culture. Here we go, Nigeria. We're looking at this Nigeria. Charlotte. Folk or pop culture?
Pop culture.
You're right, pop culture. What about this tells you pop culture?
Well, it's a pretty tall building. So, and they're not just, tall buildings aren't just specific to that area.
Absolutely. If I had covered this up and you didn't know this was Nigeria, could you have told me, yeah, that's Nigeria? Not at all. That's a good sign. If you can't tell where this is supposed to be, then you're probably talking pop culture, right? If it's clear that this is one area, then we're talking folk culture. Here we go. This is in Jordan. Joey, what do you think about this one? Is this folk culture or pop culture?
It looks like a little bit of both.
Okay, explain. Absolutely, explain.
Well, it's like a mall, so that's like the pop culture, but then like the stores inside it are like kind of specific to the area. So it's like folk.
Absolutely. We have this pop aspect. It's a mall. There's taxi cabs out front, right? But it's still very specific to a region. You look at this and you don't go, is that New York City? Right? We're pretty sure we know what region of the world this is in. So it's kind of a mixture of pop and folk culture. And that's what we're going to see today, that there's going to be a lot of blending between pop and folk culture. Here we go. Afghanistan. Carrie Ann.
Oh, this is folk culture.
Absolutely, explain.
Well, I mean, it's a very small group that wears the headdresses and such, and you wouldn't think, oh yeah, everybody wears these. It's to a specific.
Absolutely. We see this. Do we know what part of the world we're looking at?
Yeah.
Absolutely. You don't have to tell, I don't have to put Afghanistan for you guys have a pretty good gauge of where this is. It's very folk. It's very homogenous groups that we're talking about. Here we go. This is famous car race in Monaco. In Monaco. Natalie, what do you think? Are we looking at folk culture or pop culture?
Pop,
Why do you say pop?
because because it's like big and the car racing's always there, so it's like,
Okay. If I just showed you this picture, did you know this was Monaco? Could this have been any major city?
yeah.
Sure. When you were watching Sports Center, because I know you're an athlete, when you're watching Sports Center, you see IndyCar racing? Occasionally?
Yeah.
Yeah. It tells you it's not a very localized sport, right? It's worldwide. We're talking about worldwide, so this is going to be pop culture. All right? Let's move on to Vietnam here. We look at Vietnam. Megan, what do you think? Pop culture or folk culture?
I mean, I would say pop, but those names are kind of like, I don't know.
Okay, so we're seeing the language
Yeah.
may throw it off, but if what we're seeing is what? ATMs. Can I go down the street and go get money from an ATM?
Yeah.
Sure. And this is an epitome of pop culture. We got little motorbikes here. We live in Gainesville. There's tons of these with college kids, right, driving around. This could be anywhere. If you minus kind of the titles here, all of a sudden this really could be anywhere. And that's what tells us we're looking at pop culture. Daniel, Scotland here. What do you think?
Folk culture.
Why?
It's all traditional stuff from Scotland.
Absolutely. Love the accent too. Yeah, we got bagpipes. We got the kilt. I mean, if you look at this, you immediately go, that's Scotland, right? That is folk culture. You don't see that. We don't look at this picture and go, is that in Colorado? No, we're pretty sure we know what we're looking at here. Now, South Africa. This is actually a famous music group. What is this? Is this, Anna, is this folk culture, pop culture?
I think it's pop culture because people don't, it's like taking the traits of everybody. Like everybody can get tattoos, everybody can cut their hair like that, everybody can wear a chain and have the number 88 on their jersey.
Absolutely. This is an NFL football jersey in South Africa. He's got his hat on sideways. We got chains. We got tattoos. A Batista t-shirt. I mean, this is almost the epitome of pop culture, almost gone mad, right? I mean, this is all of this, but this is in South Africa. He's not watching the NFL probably, but again, there's this cultural style that is spread all the way to South Africa that tells you that it's pop culture. Tells us it's pop. All right? Look at this one. This is in Colombia. Emily, what do you think about this one?
I think it's a little bit of both because you see very traditional clothing, but they're playing soccer.
Which is what kind of sport?
It's a pop culture sport.
Absolutely. Soccer is almost the definition of pop culture these days, right? I mean, everybody in the world plays soccer. It is the most global sport of all. Yet, we're seeing very traditional garb, except for, look at their shoes. They're in sneakers, right? This is exactly where pop culture meets folk culture. And we see that they don't always have to clash. Sometimes they blend in nicely, and we get what we see here. Qatar. Carrie Ann, what do you think of this one?
Okay, pop culture? Well, no, I think so, pop culture, because like the buildings are all high tech and there's
If we look at this city, do we say traditional or brand spanking new?
brands.
Brand new. This is high tech, skyscrapers, and not just skyscrapers, very innovative, creative skyscrapers. This is pop culture. This is what you get when you get a lot of money as well. But this is pop culture. And in a lot of ways, you look at this, and this could be done anywhere. You could see this in an American city with enough money. These are modern ideas. These are not traditional folk-style ideas. What about this one? This is our last one that we're going to be choosing here. So let's look at South Africa. Joey, what do you think about this one? Pop or folk culture?
Well, kind of a little bit of both again, because it's like a TV, it's like pop culture, but then they're in like their own little hut in South Africa, and it's like folk culture in that way. They have their own like clothing that's kind of specific to Africa, and I think it's a little bit of both.
Absolutely. Again, we see this is very traditional garb here, but we also see a TV and a stereo and a washing machine, which are very pop culture. So again, when we look at pop and folk culture, we try to make these distinctions, but no culture is entirely pop or is entirely folk. There are going to be aspects of both. Now, let's look more specifically at clothing. Let's look at folk and pop clothing. And if we're going to look at folk and pop clothing, let's start with the folk clothing. Folk clothing is something we normally can pick out, right? When we think about specific cultures, we think about their folk clothing, right? When we think about kind of the American Indians, right? Or we think about African tribes, or we think about Asian cultures, there are certain things that come up that are constantly out there when we think folk clothing. But some of this has to do with practicality, right? When we're looking at, let's start with the sari here. Can anybody tell me why in India we're going to find a sari? Why is that practicality wise?
It's really hot there.
It's hot, so a sari is?
It's free. It's like really light and light colors, obviously. So that it wouldn't like something be sad.
Absolutely. It's material, being silk, and we're talking about it's breezy. It makes sense. It's practical, right? We're talking about something that has probably become pop culture, but at one point was not pop culture, right? Sherpa boots. Daniel, why Sherpa boots?
Because you work the snow.
Absolutely, and they'll keep your feet
Warm.
warm, absolutely. This one's a tricky one. The wooden shoes in Holland. Can anybody tell us why wooden shoes in Holland made real sense? But it's very folk culture.
Because it's so wet there, keep their feet dry.
Absolutely, it's wet. And the wooden shoes keep their feet dry. Snowshoes, where would we, Rachel, where would we find snowshoes? Yeah, places in the far north. Again, there's a practicality to it. It makes sense, but it's not always what's practical. Sometimes we're talking about religious aspects, right? We saw the burqa earlier. We have the niqab and the burqa, the hijab. We've seen these, right? These are not practicality. In a lot of ways, in the desert, this is not what you want to be wearing. But there's a religious aspect to it, right? We've got, anybody know what this is called? A yarmulke, absolutely. Which faith is that? The Jewish faith. Anybody recognize these guys? The Amish, absolutely. The Amish, they're going to dress in a certain way because of their religious faith. All right, anybody notice? Well, mostly Orthodox Jews. Orthodox Jews, absolutely. And those are pios. Those are and again, there's a religious connotation. So when we talk about clothing, but we also have to start talking a little bit about kind of other things, hair. And those things, they do matter, as you can tell with the Amish family as well. But as we see diffusion happens, the blending happens. Here we have an Orthodox Jew. If you were to kind of cut him off from the head, very pop, kind of stylish clothing. Why is this diffusion? Why is this parka, Daniel, an example of diffusion?
It's not made of any traditional materials. It's using modern materials, but
But-
it still does the same classical purpose.
Actually, at one point, the parka was what? It was folk. It was folk culture that is, we've kind of seen it and went, oh, we like that. Let's take that. Let's take that idea. Dashikis. Very traditional folk culture have kind of spread. You can kind of buy them in stores in America now, right? We see this combination here, the hijabs with jeans, right? Anybody know what this is? Ponchos. Very traditional folk culture that we... And if we look at Zydeco, Zydeco is another example of a folk music. Now, Zydeco you're only going to find in this New Orleans Creole area, but it's a very specific music that really fits in with a very specific area. And if Zydeco had caught on like some of the others, we may be talking about Zydeco as pop music. But again, some are going to spread out, some are going to stay localized. Some are going to spread out, some are going to stay localized. All right? So let's look at some pop music on the other side. Obviously, we all know when we're talking pop music, we got Michael Jackson, right? Katy Perry. Those are what we think of when we think of as pop music, right? Nobody's going to deny if I say, hey, Britney Spears is pop music. You guys go, well, yeah, duh, that's pop music. But now that we know the definitions of pop and folk, this is also pop music. Jay-Z's pop music. It's not pop what we think of as pop, but it's pop. Anna, explain to us why Jay-Z, Elvis, Frank Sinatra, Tupac, the Beatles, the Killers, Metallica, Kenny Chesney, they're all pop music.
Because their music spreads everywhere, several countries, they go on tours worldwide.
Absolutely, they're going on world tours. Are there bands that sound like Metallica that come from other parts of the world? Absolutely there are. Are there rappers from all over the world? Sure, that's pop. That has ceased to be folk music anymore. Now, when rap started, was rap probably a folk culture specific to certain areas of the United States? Yes. Sure. Not anymore. That's long gone, right? Even rock and roll, when it first started, was kind of localized, but it became pop very quickly. And that's what we have to understand when we're looking at pop and folk, is something can be folk, but the second it starts spreading, it's pop. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play for you guys a video. And you guys are going to tell me whether this is an example of pop culture or folk culture. All right, Daniel, is that folk culture or is that pop culture? Why do you say pop?
Because it crosses several different histories. It talks about oppression around the world.
Okay, so we're talking about many histories, talks about oppression around the world. Who else can tell me why it might be leaning towards pop?
He raps in it.
Yeah, I mean, the style of music, it's this kind of reggae style rap, which is pop. I mean, you can get that anywhere. But why might somebody go, I don't know if that's completely pop.
Because he's traditional Jewish. He has his yarmulke and his beard.
Absolutely. He's got the beard, he's got the yarmulke, he's even wearing his traditional prayer shawl. But at the same time, what does he have over his prayer shawl? He's got a hoodie on. He is, and this is Mattis Yahoo, but he is almost the epitome of folk culture mixed with pop culture. He's rapping about different cultures, but the name of the song is Jerusalem, right? He's singing about his heritage. Now, he's incorporating it with other things. But in a lot of ways, this is folk and this is pop culture. It's kind of a combination of the two. And that's what makes kind of learning about folk and pop culture so interesting, is that if you look in your own lives, you can probably see some examples of some folk culture and some pop culture kind of within yourself here when we're looking at that. Now, the last thing we're going to look at today is you guys, on your way in, picked up a reading titled Amish Folk Clothing. So I want you guys to read through it, and then we're going to talk a little bit about what the Amish perceive as folk clothing.